My brother demanded to propose at my wedding because he's older. My parents and grandma took his side. I didn't argue. I recorded everything and locked down every vendor. He still showed up uninvited, and his meltdown ended up online for everyone to see. Hey, Reddit. I grew up in a family where favoritism wasn't subtle. It was basically a house rule. So I did what any sane person would do. Built my own life, kept my distance, and thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. They had one last stunt saved up, and it hit right before my wedding. Before all that, here's how it started. I'm Zach. I'm 27. I work a salaried office job that pays well enough to be boring, and I'm getting married in April to Arya, who is smarter than me, and somehow still agreed to marry me. My family situation is simple on paper and messy in real life. I have an older brother, Eric. My parents are Thomas and Viola. My mom's mom, Catherine, has always been very involved in everyone's business. My dad's dad, Joe, mostly stays quiet and mostly stays on my side. That Saturday, my mom texted me, "We need to talk. Can you come by tonight?" That usually means it's already decided, and they want me to nod along. It was late January, the kind of cold week where everything feels like it's waiting to start. I got there just after 6. When I walked into the living room, Eric was already sitting at the table. Not casually either. He had a folder in front of him, like he'd brought notes. Catherine was there too, sitting upright with her hands folded. That's when I knew this wasn't a check-in. This was a setup. Thomas cleared his throat and said they wanted to talk about the wedding. Viola nodded and said it was nothing bad, just something to consider. Eric didn't look at me. He was staring at the folder. Thomas said Eric wanted to propose to his girlfriend Maya at my wedding, specifically during the family photo session after the ceremony. He said it wouldn't interrupt anything important. Viola added it would be quick and not disruptive. I said no. That was it. One word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. Catherine leaned forward immediately and said, "He's older. He should go first." I didn't respond to her right away. I took my phone out, set it flat on the table, and said I was recording so nobody would be confused later about what was said. Nobody objected. That told me everything I needed to know. I said this wasn't a debate. The wedding schedule wasn't available for other people's plans. The photo session was part of the wedding, not an open mic. Eric finally spoke and said it wouldn't take long and that people would already be gathered. He still didn't look at me. I said no again, and then I added that I was already reviewing my finances because of the wedding. I told them calmly that the monthly $500 I'd been sending would end after the current quarter. I didn't say it as a threat. I said it as a fact. Weddings cost money. Life changes. That support was temporary, and they'd always known that. Catherine made a noise like I'd insulted her personally and said I was selfish. She said I was choosing money over family and acting like everything had to be my way. Hearing that didn't surprise me. It lined up with how things had always gone. When we were kids, Eric broke a stained glass lamp at Catherine's house, throwing a ball inside. He cried. I got blamed and punished. Eric got rides everywhere. I took the bus. When Eric went to college, they took out a second mortgage. When I went, I worked and figured it out. Years later, when that mortgage started to hurt them, I was the one sending money every month to help keep things steady. Joe was the only one who ever said anything back then. He picked me up when I didn't have a ride. He covered fees when I came up short. He told me more than once that I wasn't imagining things. Viola tried to smooth it over. She said they thought I'd understand. She said Eric was under a lot of pressure and that this could help him feel settled. I told her this wasn't a debate. It was a calendar conflict with one answer. My wedding day wasn't available. Eric finally looked up and said I was making a big deal out of nothing. Catherine nodded like that settled it. I stood up. I said I'd send everything in writing so there were no misunderstandings. I didn't wait for permission to leave. Nobody followed me to the door. When I got home, I sat on the edge of the couch and texted Arya. I didn't vent. I didn't rant. I sent her a short list. They want Eric to propose during photos. I said no. I told them I'm recording everything. Monthly support ends after this quarter. I'm locking down vendors. We'll talk through next steps tonight. She replied with one line. Okay, I'm with you. That was enough. The next morning, I was making coffee when someone knocked hard on my door. I opened it to find Eric standing there, red in the face, saying I'd killed his chance and ruined everything. And that was how I knew this wasn't going to stop at one dinner. The week after that dinner, I stopped talking and started writing. Monday morning before work, I opened my laptop and made a checklist. Venue, DJ, officiant, coordinator. Anything that could be touched from the outside needed a lock on it. I called the venue first. I told them there were family members trying to make changes without my consent, and that from now on, no changes happened unless they came directly from me. We set a password. Nothing fancy, just something they'd ask for before touching anything. The manager thanked me and said it wasn't the first time they'd dealt with this kind of thing. Next was the DJ, Brent. He didn't even let me finish explaining before he said, "Already had a weird email." He forwarded it while we were on the phone. It was from Eric. He'd asked to add a song and a lighting cue for photos, said it was a surprise and that I'd approved it verbally. He even signed it with my name. I replied all, kept it short, and didn't soften it. Unauthorized. Do not comply. All requests come from me only. Brent replied with a thumbs up and confirmed the password. That door was closed. I repeated the process with the officiant and then Lena, our coordinator. Lena was sharp. She asked if I wanted a written protocol. I said yes. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Maya. I'm sorry to bother you. Eric told me you weren't comfortable with something, and I think I just figured out what he meant. I want you to know I didn't ask for any of this." I told him absolutely not. I replied once. "Thanks for clarifying. I hope you're okay." She didn't text again. But after that, Eric stopped talking about what she wants and started talking about what he was owed. By Wednesday, the venue emailed me a scanned document. It was a printed letter on plain paper, claiming to give permission for a brief proposal moment during wedding photography. It had my name typed at the bottom. Lena flagged it before it went anywhere. The letter didn't have the simple watermark I'd been using on everything official. Even better, the printer footer was still visible. It showed a model number that matched the same kind of printer I'd seen at Catherine's place before. Not proof by itself, but enough to confirm it didn't come from me. Lena scanned it, emailed it to me, and logged it. Then she asked how I wanted to proceed. I told her to add it to the file and move on. No confrontation, just records. That afternoon, I sent over a one-page document titled Event Boundaries. It listed in plain language that there would be no proposals, announcements, speeches, or surprises outside the agreed schedule. Any attempt would be treated as interference with the event. Lena signed it and uploaded it to the planning folder. Thursday night, I started a group chat with my groomsmen. I didn't give them a speech. I gave them jobs. One guy was responsible for keeping the aisle clear before the ceremony. One stayed near the photo area during transitions. One kept an eye on entrances. If something felt off, they were to text me one word. Chicken. Stupid, I know. This code was sent to the rest, including security and the coordinator. Nobody joked about it. They all said, "Got it," and that was that. Friday morning, Joe called me. He didn't waste time. He said Catherine had asked him to talk to me. She wanted him to explain how important it was to be flexible, how Eric needed this, how family comes first. Joe told her no. He said it wasn't his wedding and it wasn't her decision. Then he warned me she wasn't done pushing. He told me to keep everything documented and not to argue. "People like that don't stop," he said. "They just look for a new angle." That afternoon, Viola called. She asked if I was serious about ending the monthly support. She didn't sound angry. She sounded nervous. I told her yes, and that I'd already planned for it. I followed up with an email an hour later. It was polite and clean. I confirmed the end date. I attached a list of the amounts I'd already sent and the dates. No commentary, just numbers. That night, Arya texted me while I was still at work. She said Catherine had stopped by the apartment. I wasn't home yet. Catherine had said she just wanted to drop something off. Arya didn't open the door all the way. Catherine stood there anyway and started talking. She said Eric was fragile. She said he'd been having a hard time. She said a proposal would settle him and give him direction. She framed it like concern, like advice. She said Arya would understand if she thought about it from Eric's perspective. Arya told her calmly that Eric's feelings weren't her responsibility and that our wedding wasn't a tool to manage him. She said decisions about the wedding were already made and that showing up unannounced wasn't appropriate. Catherine didn't yell. She sighed. She said she was disappointed. Then she left. When I got home, Arya told me everything, start to finish. She wasn't shaken. She was annoyed. The next morning, Viola texted me. She said Catherine didn't understand why I wouldn't share the day. I typed my reply once. She understands. She just doesn't like it. I put my phone down after that. Everything that needed locking was locked. Everything that needed writing was written. And everyone who needed to know now knew that I wasn't going to argue this into submission. If they wanted to push, they'd have to do it on paper. About 2 weeks before the wedding, Catherine tried a new angle. She didn't call me directly. She didn't loop everyone into a group chat. Instead, she started telling relatives she was planning a small family brunch the morning of the wedding for people who wouldn't make it later. That wording showed up twice in forwarded messages, before I even heard it from her. It was obvious what it was meant to do. Split attendance. Pull people away early. Create a second center of gravity on a day that wasn't hers. I shut it down the same way I'd shut everything else down. I sent a short message to the family group chat. No commentary, no blame. Wedding schedule is unchanged. There are no side events the day of. Please follow the invite. That was it. A few relatives replied with thumbs ups. One aunt said thanks for clarifying. Catherine didn't respond at all. Later that same day, Eric called me. He said I was being unfair and that I was forgetting something important. He claimed I'd once told him that if I ever got married first, he could do his thing at my wedding. He said it like it was a quote. I told him I had no memory of that. I asked when he thought I'd said it. He couldn't say. He said it was years ago. He said it was understood. I brought it up that evening when I stopped by my parents' house. Thomas and Viola were both there. Joe was there too, sitting in his usual chair. I asked them if they remembered me ever saying anything like that. Thomas shook his head immediately. Viola said she didn't remember it either. Joe looked at Eric and asked him to be specific. Where were we? How old were we? Who else was there? Eric couldn't answer any of it. He got frustrated and said it didn't matter, because that was how he remembered it. Joe said memory doesn't work like a contract. That ended that conversation. A few days later, we had an early walkthrough at the venue. This wasn't the rehearsal dinner. It was just a practical run-through so the coordinator could confirm timing and spacing. Arya and I were there with Lena, the coordinator, and Owen, the head of security. Eric wasn't supposed to be there. He showed up anyway. He said he just wanted to see the layout. He said it casually, like it wasn't a big deal. He stayed close but quiet while Lena walked us through the photo area. At one point, Arya stepped a few feet away to look at where her family would stand. Eric followed her. I saw it happen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move quickly. I said the code word once. Chicken. Owen was already watching. He stepped in, placed himself between them, and asked Eric to come with him. Eric tried to say he was just asking a question. Owen didn't argue. He guided him toward the exit and walked him out. It took less than a minute. Most people there didn't even register it. Lena asked if we wanted to pause. Arya said no. We finished the walkthrough without another issue. Arya told me then, laughing, "It's funny how the walkthrough also included Eric. Now if something happened, we've already practiced it." I laughed. A few days after that, I got a call from Viola. She said she couldn't find her ring. It wasn't her wedding ring. It was an heirloom she'd inherited years ago and kept in a small case. She said she'd noticed it was missing that morning and thought she'd misplaced it. I stopped by that evening. While we were talking, a family friend came by to drop something off. In passing, she mentioned that Catherine had taken the ring earlier that week. She said Catherine told her she was keeping it safe. Viola went quiet. Thomas didn't say anything. I drove to Catherine's place, got the ring, and brought it back the same day. I didn't make a scene. I handed it to Viola and said it was found. Catherine followed me into the hallway and said she was just holding on to it. She said she didn't think anyone would notice. She said she was helping. She didn't apologize. That was when Thomas finally spoke up. He said respect starts with rent. He said it calmly, like he'd already decided. He told Eric they were done pretending he was a guest in their house instead of an adult living there. That night, Thomas and I sat at the table and drafted a lease. Nothing fancy. Rent amount, utilities, a deadline. Eric was given a copy. Eric said no. He said it was unfair. He said they were choosing me over him. Thomas told him he was choosing adulthood over excuses. Eric moved in with Catherine shortly after that. He packed quickly and left without saying much. The next morning, I got a text from Aunt Janice. She said a church elder wanted to talk and that it might help smooth things over. I didn't reply right away. I just added it to the list. Viola asked me to come over for one more meeting. She said if I showed up once, maybe the noise would stop. She sounded tired when she said it, not angry. I agreed on the condition that it was one meeting and I wouldn't argue. It happened in my parents' dining room a few days later. Janice was there, sitting stiffly with her hands folded. Mr. Holloway, the church elder, sat beside her. Catherine arrived last and acted like this was a favor she was doing for everyone. Thomas stayed quiet. Viola looked like she was bracing for impact. Catherine started talking almost immediately. She said Eric was sensitive and struggling. She said family should help each other. She said the wedding would already have everyone together, so why not let him have a moment? She framed it as kindness, like this was about compassion instead of control. I didn't interrupt her. When she finished, I laid out the facts. I said when the wedding was scheduled. I said what events were part of it. I said when I said no. I said I recorded the conversation. I said there were attempts to go around me afterward, including contacting vendors. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't add commentary. I stuck to dates and actions. Mr. Holloway listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once and said, proposing at someone else's wedding wasn't appropriate. He said it plainly, like it wasn't even a close call. He said family pressure didn't change that. Then he stood up, thanked everyone for their time, and left. Janice followed a minute later without saying much. Catherine didn't react right away. She stared at the table, then said, none of this would be happening if I hadn't made such a big deal out of it. That was when my phone buzzed. It was a cousin. She forwarded me screenshots of a message thread I hadn't seen before. In it, Catherine told several relatives that I'd threatened to abandon Thomas and Viola unless Eric was allowed to propose. She said I was holding money over their heads. She said I was forcing their hand. The messages were detailed. They were also wrong. I didn't respond to the cousin right away. I put my phone on the table and slid it toward Thomas and Viola. I told them those messages contradicted the recorded conversation they'd been present for. Viola read them slowly. Her face changed while she did. Thomas didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. Catherine tried to explain. She said people misunderstood. She said she was just trying to get help. She said it wasn't meant that way. Viola finally spoke. She said she didn't push back sooner because Catherine didn't let things go. She said when Catherine was crossed, she escalated. She said it made life miserable, and avoiding that had felt easier than confronting it. That was the first time she'd said it out loud. The room went quiet after that. There wasn't anything left to argue. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the venue manager. She said she wanted to loop me in because they'd received several calls from third parties asking about changes to the schedule and equipment. None of them had the password. None of them were approved. I told her I had documentation and could forward everything if needed. She said she'd already reviewed the file and just wanted to confirm I was aware. I told her everything was handled and thanked her for being careful. That night, Arya and I made the call we'd been circling for weeks. I didn't want drama at the door. I wanted clarity. I emailed Lena and Owen and told them Catherine was no longer invited. I asked Lena to mark her as revoked in the check-in system and to document it in the planning file the same way she documented everything else. Lena replied in 10 minutes. Done. Owen replied right after, if she shows up, she won't get past the entrance. That same week, I took care of something unrelated that had been nagging at me. When I was reviewing finances, I realized the monthly support I'd been sending had been handled oddly on last year's taxes. I didn't like not understanding it, so I scheduled a meeting with the owner of the firm that handled my filing. I brought records. He reviewed them himself and said the issue came from last year's filing. He said it shouldn't have been handled that way and apologized. He corrected it and told me the preparer wouldn't be handling my account anymore. It wasn't dramatic. It was clean. That night, Arya and I talked through everything. She told me again what Catherine had said when she showed up unannounced. She said the tone had been calm, almost rehearsed. She said that made it worse. I opened a note on my phone and titled it Scoreboard. It wasn't for posting or proving anything to anyone else. It was for me. I wrote down dates, actions, and who said what. No opinions, just facts. 2 days later, Lena emailed me. She said the venue had logged and blocked one last attempt to add equipment under my name. It didn't go anywhere. She just wanted it noted. I replied with a thank you and archived the message. At that point, the pattern was clear. Every time one door closed, another angle appeared. But every attempt left a trail. And the more trails there were, the harder it became for anyone to pretend this was about misunderstanding instead of control. The noise didn't stop, but it stopped being loud. The morning of the wedding was clear, warm, and quiet enough that it felt like a reset. The venue sat next to a pond lined with reeds and a few wandering ducks that acted like they owned the place. Staff moved calmly between the ceremony space and the reception area, running last checks. Nothing felt rushed. Check-in for guests was handled at 2 small tables with tablets. Lena's team had everything color-coded and organized. Anyone who scanned in appeared green on the tablet. Anyone whose invitation had been revoked showed red, with a note attached. Simple, clean, no room for arguments. I walked by the check-in area once before heading back to the groom's suite. The staff reassured me everything was locked and ready. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need any. Guests began arriving in clusters. I could hear greetings, chair legs shifting, and kids running near the pond. Nothing sounded tense. That lasted until I heard someone say, "She's here," followed by a pause. I didn't need a name to know who they meant. Catherine arrived holding her paper invitation like it was a badge. She walked straight up to the check-in table and tried to hand it over. The tablet flashed red. The staff member explained calmly that her invitation had been revoked and she wasn't on the approved list. Catherine said it was a mistake. She said she'd talk to me. She said she was already here and it would be rude to turn her away. She tried to step around the table, but the staff didn't move. They repeated the line. The invitation had been revoked, and no one could override that except me, and they would not call me during the event. Catherine asked who gave them permission to make decisions like that. The staff member pointed to the policy binder with the signed protocol inside. She tried to argue again until one of the venue employees quietly mentioned that if she didn't leave, they'd have to involve local security. She left without another word, walking fast but stiffly, like she expected someone to call her back. No one did. Eric arrived on foot, trying to blend in with a group of late guests. He didn't check in. He stayed near the edges, waiting. Maya wasn't with him. She'd told him weeks earlier she wouldn't attend a wedding he planned to hijack. When it was time for the ceremony to start, Lena came to get me. She said the layout was set, microphones were connected, and guests were seated. She also mentioned the venue's AV tech had double-checked the equipment lockout. Microphones were only released to the coordinator or the officiant. If anyone else asked for one, the tech wouldn't hand it over. I thanked her and walked with her toward the ceremony area. Joe was already seated. He had chosen the groom's side, even though tradition usually put grandparents wherever they wanted. His choice didn't make noise, but a few people glanced at him and then at Thomas and Viola. Nobody said anything. Joe just nodded at me. The ceremony started smoothly. Arya walked down the aisle. The music played exactly the way we planned, and people actually whispered compliments instead of gossip. The officiant kept things short. The ducks wandered near the pond, uninterested in the people but interested enough in the small pile of proper duck feed someone had set aside for kids. No one threw bread. The venue had signs asking them not to. After the ceremony, we moved toward the photo area. The plan was structured: family first, then the bridal party, then any optional groupings. People were shifting into place when Eric tried to step in. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He just moved toward the space between the photographer and the rest of the guests, like he belonged in the frame. He opened his mouth like he was about to speak. He got out a single word, "Zach," and that was it. Owen and another security staffer were already moving. They approached from opposite sides, kept their hands visible, and guided him away with practiced ease. Eric tried to say something quietly, but the photographer kept snapping photos as if nothing was happening. People noticed, but only briefly. Most turned back to the camera when Lena told them to reset. Eric didn't resist. He just looked stunned that no one paused for him. When he was far enough out of range, I turned to the group and said, "Quick pause, he's not part of today, thanks." Then I nodded at the photographer to continue. It was the only line I said about the whole thing. Photos finished without another interruption. Guests moved to the reception area. The sun was lowering just enough to soften the light across the pond. Kids tossed small handfuls of duck feed and laughed when the ducks waddled close. Inside the reception tent, everything ran exactly on schedule. No missing equipment, no sudden announcements, no surprises. About 15 minutes before the first dance, Lena approached me and said someone outside the property line had been yelling at staff and that a passerby had started filming. She didn't name Eric, but she didn't need to. She said security had handled it and that she needed my signature for the incident form. I stepped aside, signed the report, and handed the clipboard back. Then I went to find Arya. I didn't mention any of it until much later. There was no need. The entire point of the plan was that none of this belonged inside the wedding. And it didn't. 2 weeks after the wedding, a short clip made its way around local social media. It was only 10 seconds long. Someone had filmed Eric outside the venue, arguing with staff near the property line. You couldn't hear much over the wind, but you could see him pointing back toward the ceremony area and insisting someone go get Zach. It didn't go viral, but it traveled far enough that a couple of coworkers asked if that was my brother. I said yes and kept working. Not long after that, I heard from a cousin that Eric had missed a shift at his job the Monday after the wedding. The missed shift wasn't my business, but apparently the company wrote him up for it, along with a note about professional conduct expectations. It wasn't connected to our situation directly, but it didn't help him. Meanwhile, Arya and I were on our honeymoon, which we'd planned as a low-key road trip. When we got back, I sat down with the incident reports, emails, and receipts from the wedding. There were extra hours from security, an added fee from the venue for the staff time dealing with outside interference, and a cleaning charge related to someone pulling at decorations near an exit. None of it was dramatic, but it added up. I totaled the costs and filed in small claims court against Eric. I attached the receipts, the contract clauses, and the logged incidents. He agreed to a payment plan before the hearing date, and the court entered it as the schedule. Within a few weeks, it was done. During that same stretch of time, Thomas and Viola finished preparing 2 rooms in their house for renting. They found tenants quickly, young professionals who worked odd hours and appreciated the cheaper rent. The added income steadied their finances in a way my monthly support never could. They didn't say they were relieved, but the difference was obvious. Viola started talking about planting herbs again. Thomas began fixing small things around the house he'd ignored for years. My monthly support ended quietly on the date I had set months earlier. No reminders, no questions, no tension. It just stopped, and that was that. Around the end of the month, I received a letter from Eric. It started with an apology. He said he was sorry for showing up at the wedding and sorry for the misunderstandings. He wrote a few lines about wanting to make things right. Then the tone shifted. He said I'd escalated things by overreacting, that I'd embarrassed him publicly, and that he felt like I'd been waiting for a chance to make him look irresponsible. The letter ended with a sentence about how family was supposed to support each other, even when mistakes happen. I read it twice, set it aside, and wrote my reply that same night. I kept it simple. I acknowledge the apology portion of your letter. I do not accept any of the blame you tried to redirect. Going forward, if you want contact, it will be limited, respectful, and based on clear communication. There will be no unannounced visits. If you want to talk, send a letter first with your plan for the conversation. I mailed it the next morning. Around that time, I got a call from Thomas, telling me that Catherine had been taken to the hospital after a bad episode at home. No details at first, just that something was wrong. Later that week, I learned the medical staff had discovered several long-ignored health issues. Her breathing wasn't good. Her kidney function was low. She hadn't been consistent with medications. She needed supervision, not an empty house. After an evaluation, the doctors recommended she be moved into a supervised living arrangement. It wasn't optional. Viola told me Catherine fought it until she physically couldn't anymore. I visited her once. The facility was clean and quiet. She was sitting in a chair near the window, staring at something outside. She looked smaller than she used to. Not physically, just in presence. She didn't apologize. She didn't bring up the wedding. She only said she didn't understand why things had turned out this way. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I stayed about 15 minutes, spoke politely, and left. Thomas told me later she had repeated that same line to every relative who visited. Months passed quietly. Arya and I got back into routine. My parents settled into their rental setup. Joe called every so often just to check in. Then one afternoon, there was a knock at our door. When I opened it, Eric was standing there. No raised voice this time, no tension in his posture. He was holding a folded piece of paper in both hands like he wasn't sure what to do with it. He didn't have an audience. There was no Catherine behind him, and no argument ready. He just said, "I wrote something. Can we talk?" That was the first moment in a long time that didn't feel like part of the same pattern. Eric stood on my porch holding the folded paper like it might fall apart if he loosened his grip. He didn't try to force a conversation. He waited until I nodded, then unfolded it and read from the page. It was an apology, but not the kind I was used to hearing from him. No phrases about stress, no sideways comments, no blame tucked into the wording. He listed what he'd done. Showing up at the wedding, trying to change plans behind my back, dragging relatives into it. He didn't try to soften any of it. When he finished reading, he took out another sheet, a copy of his lease. A real one. His name was on it, along with rent amounts, dates, and the signature of a landlord who wasn't our parents or Catherine. He said he wanted to start over, but not from scratch. He didn't ask for closeness. He asked for a path. I told him I wasn't opening the door wide, but I wasn't closing it either. I said contact would be slow and structured, letters first, then calls, and only in-person meetings if those went well. No unannounced visits, no involvement in big decisions unless invited. Clear rules, nothing vague. He agreed immediately, like he'd already practiced the answer. When he left, he didn't try to hug me. He just nodded once and walked to his car. A few weeks after that, I stopped by my parents' house. The difference from a year earlier was obvious without anyone saying a word. The front porch had been repainted. Thomas had fixed the loose railing that had bothered him for years. Viola had replaced a damaged window screen. The kitchen light that used to flicker had been repaired. They weren't suddenly perfect, but they were steady, and steady was enough. While I was there, Thomas mentioned something I hadn't known. A week after the wedding, before the small claims case, before Eric's letter, Joe had asked them to meet. He invited only them and Eric. The meeting wasn't long. Joe told Thomas and Viola calmly that they'd failed me more than once. He said ignoring problems wasn't neutral, it was fuel. He said letting Catherine direct how the family worked had damaged all of us, but mostly me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get emotional. He listed what happened: the second mortgage for Eric, the years of unequal treatment, the pressure around the wedding, the attempts to make me responsible for Eric's feelings. Then he looked at Eric and said, favoritism wasn't love. He said love pushes people to grow, not shrink. When he was done, he put on his coat and left without waiting for anyone to argue. Thomas told me that moment hit harder than anything I'd said all year. Time passed quietly after that. Arya and I settled into our routine. My parents managed their tenants without trouble. Eric stayed consistent with the rules we set. No surprise visits, letters every few weeks updating me on work and bills and counseling appointments he'd started on his own. Then, months after the wedding, Catherine's health declined quickly. I didn't get all the details, but the facility called Viola first. Breathing trouble, heart strain, a sudden drop in responsiveness. She passed during the night while a nurse was doing her rounds. There was no dramatic announcement, no drawn-out conflict at the end, just a short call, arrangements, and a date for the funeral. The service was subdued. People kept their voices low. No one tried to rewrite anything or pretend things had been easy. Joe sat beside Thomas. I sat beside Arya. Eric stood a little apart, but close enough to show he understood the moment. After the burial, there was a small gathering at my parents' house. Quiet conversations, coffee in mismatched mugs, and a few relatives sharing stories that didn't require sugarcoating. The tension that used to live in that house wasn't gone, but it wasn't in control anymore. A few weeks later, the will was read. It was more balanced than anyone expected. Thomas and Viola inherited the house. The remaining assets were divided fairly among the branches of the family. No surprises, no dramatic favoritism. My parents kept the house as a rental property. They said it was the most practical option. Joe told me later he suspected she'd done it to protect herself. A lopsided will would have invited a fight, and Catherine hated losing control more than she loved rewarding anyone. A fair split wasn't kindness. It was insurance. Life settled again. Then one evening, while we were putting groceries away, Arya handed me a small white box. Inside was a pregnancy test and a note that said, "Ready?" I didn't say anything for a moment. It wasn't shock, just a shift in weight, like I'd stepped into a new room I had always planned to enter, but never pictured clearly until that second. We set up the crib a week later. It arrived early, and the frame wobbled when I finished putting it together. I tightened the screws, checked them again, and nudged the crib gently until it sat steady. Arya laughed and said that was the most Zach approach possible. That night, I opened the scoreboard note on my phone. I scrolled past the dates, the messages, the protocol lines, the vendor issues, the thread screenshots, the clipped quotes. None of it felt heavy anymore. It was just the history of how things had gone. At the bottom, I typed one last line. Married the right person. Kept the boundary. Grandpa had my back. That's enough. And it was. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.